All right, so the final key concept for period 5 or 1750 to 1900 is global migration. So all of the things happening right now in the world, like imperialism, industrialization, and all that stuff, all of that ultimately leads to global migration because people have to move along with the things. So this is what this key concept's talking about. So the migration patterns changed dramatically throughout this period. And the numbers of the migrants increased significantly, obviously, because you have these new settler colonies and everything. These changes were closely connected to the development of the transoceanic empires and a global capitalist economy. In some cases, people benefited economically from migration, while other people were seen simply as commodities to be transported. And in both cases, migration produced dramatically different societies for both sending and receiving societies, and they presented challenges to governments in fostering the national identities and regulating the flow of people. So, migration in many cases was influenced by changes in both industrialized and non industrialized societies, and that presented challenges to the existing patterns of living in these areas.
All right, now global population. You got changes in food production and improved medical conditions, and those both combined contributed to a significant global rise in populations. Because of the nature of the new modes of transportation, you also have internal and external migrants increasingly relocating to cities. And this pattern contributed to the significant global urbanization of the 19th century. Now, also, along with this rapid urbanization, which you can see here on the graph, um, you have an increase in poor conditions. So you've got poor living conditions, poor working conditions, and a major example of this is tenement housing. Now, on this image, you see street Arabs, as they were called, because they were nomadic children. And Jacob Riis photographed life in cities, specifically New York cities, how difficult it was in tenement housing and in these poor factories. And thanks to his widespread photography, like it was published so widely, um, he brought about a lot of effective social changes to get rid of tenement housing and to improve life with like sanitation and stuff like that. During the late 19th century and early 20th century. So migrants ultimately relocated for a lot of different reasons. You've got manual laborers and specialized professionals. They could be moving for so many different reasons. But many individuals chose freely to relocate, often in search of jobs. So whether you were a manual laborer working, just basically being a hard worker, or a specialized professional, like if a specialized professional example would be like a lawyer or a doctor. They went in search of work. So labor, you've got the new global capitalist economy, and it continued to rely on coerced and semi-coerced labor. So that includes slavery, Chinese and Indian indentured servitude, and convict labor, which you see going over to Australia. Um, Thankfully, slavery was outlawed during this period, but you still see semi-coerced labor migration through the indentured servitude and convict labor. While many migrants permanently relocated, a large number of temporary and seasonal migrants returned back to their home societies. So that would be like your Japanese agricultural workers in the Pacific, your Lebanese merchants coming to the Americas and then going back home, and then your Italian industrial workers in Argentina. You also have large-scale migration, which produced a variety of consequences and reactions to this increasingly diverse society on both the part of migrants and the existing populations. Due to the physical nature of the labor in demand, migrants often tended to be male, which left women to take on new roles in the home society that had been formerly occupied by men. That's also another big reason that the women's suffrage movement gained a lot of steam during this period, because they were taking on these new roles in their societies, and they thought that rights should come along with them. You've also got ethnic enclaves. So that's just a fancy way of saying like neighborhoods of specific groups of people. So they kept their culture within these neighborhoods or these enclaves, and that facilitated the development of migrant support networks. So if you knew that there were going to be people in the new location that were going to be similar to you with similar culture, similar language, it was going to be a lot easier to leave your home country and go to the new country for work and better opportunities if you knew you had that support system there. So, for example, you have the Chinese setting up enclaves in Southeast Asia, the Caribbean, South America, North America. Think about Chinatown, basically, in Washington, D.C., New York City, Mexico, even. You also have Indians setting up ethnic enclaves in East and Southern Africa, the Caribbean, and Southeast Asia. And unfortunately, we come to the bear of prejudice. So, receiving societies did not always embrace the new immigrants, as seen in the various degrees of racial and ethnic prejudices, and the ways that the states attempted to regulate the increased flow of people across their borders. During this time, you see the Chinese Exclusion Act barring Chinese from coming to the United States, and the White Australia policy, obviously focused on protection of whites in Australia. Another ugly thing that you see coming up from prejudice at this point in time is the growth of the Ku Klux Klan, or the KKK, largely directed against immigrants, that they were afraid that they were stealing jobs. Not only was this directed at immigrants, but it was also directed at African Americans. So a lot of racial prejudice was happening at this time, quite frequently justified by social Darwinism. So you see all of these different key concepts blending together in their importance.